When I was in middle school and high school, I didn't quite grow out of it. I used to have this fantasy in my head that I would enter the gymnasium and do some sort of a double backflip, really high, of course, up in the air, land on the ground, look around at everybody, and they would cheer for me. I think that was my early attempt at executive presence. I didn't know it at the time, but ultimately, what it was is I wanted to command the room. And in today's episode of This is the Way, we're going to discuss executive presence, that elusive thing that sometimes, leadership likes to dangle over and be like, you need to improve your executive presence. So, this is the way to enhance your executive presence. Artin, what does executive presence mean to you?
It is slightly ambiguous and, and subjective, but to me, uh, it comes, I think of communication style and somebody that could really tell stories and be charismatic. And what you said, command the room. To me, that's executive presence.
So, if I did that backflip into gymnasium, would have you been like, yeah, Michael, woohoo?
I would have definitely cheered for you, but I don't know if I would have hired you as an executive. I would have,
Not-
I would have give you a referral to a gymnastic coach.
okay. Fair. So since I'm obviously not the best example in describing my gymnasium aspirations, who would you pick and who in your mind? Because let's dive into actually a specific individual and speak to what it is that makes that person able to command a room, which ultimately I think to me is a really simplistic way of being able to boil down that executive presence.
Let's see. I think, I want to come up with a name that is very recognizable. Let's use Steve Jobs. I think everybody knows Steve Jobs. That's a good person. So we can dissect him and say, here's what he did that kind of tells us he has executive presence and how you could emulate that, or you can pick your own person and your own leader or public figure and emulate them. But that's kind of how you could dissect and figure out how you want to be perceived.
And I love that because that to me is the number one thing anybody can do when they're trying to build their own executive presence is look to somebody that they can model who has it. So Steve Jobs is perfect. I have a couple of quick stats that I did write down that I wanted to quickly highlight here, just so people understand why this is important. And even though leaders may use it loosely sometimes, not always with clear information about what aspect or what to you need to accomplish to be able to be this person with executive presence. But first impressions matter. There was a study by Princeton University that says it takes only a tenth of a second for people to form an impression of someone's trustworthiness and competence based on their facial appearance. And it's not just for the top executives either, because there's another study outside of C-suite that looked at a survey from the creative leadership, and it revealed that mid-level managers with a strong executive presence are 50% more likely to be promoted, which is a goal of a lot of people listening to this podcast. And then just to share another one too, there is a survey conducted by University of California, and over 85% of respondents emphasize the importance of effective communication skills in building executive presence. So with that, let's jump in a little bit to what is it about Steve Jobs, and what's the first thing that comes to mind for you?
Oh, his storytelling. The way he would get on stage, or even like the YouTube clips that are constantly circulating on social media. The way he was able to tell a story and link that story to his vision and mission was just amazing. And I think that kind of says how natural it was for him to think of the customer's needs and get into the marketing and the product of things. But his storytelling, I've always thought was amazing. Just liked watching him.
I agree. I think, much like my gymnasium story, really, yeah, and I kid. So, but I think with that, if you consider two things you just said, storytelling, which I completely agree with, and this comes down to somebody's ability to present in general, and their communication skills. And he did a couple of different things there. Not only did he tell really good stories, but he knew when to pause and to wait and to let the audience respond and become part of that with him. You mentioned one other thing though as well, which was around that mission or vision. And I think that's something else that makes, the somebody who has a strong executive presence is that oftentimes they have a clear thing, and sometimes people know that. Like, people knew what Steve Jobs was trying to, accomplish, if you will. I mean, this is something, not to cheat and jump over to other people, but like with Elon, what he might sometimes lack in some of his approach and demeanor, he makes up for because he has this clear vision and thing that he could get people excited about. They want to follow. And I think Steve had that as well. And it bleeded over to his product in a way that people embodied this idea of think different, because this is how Steve Jobs thought, and this is what it meant to be a customer of the product. So I think that that vision and mission is actually another really important thing, and why individuals who want to keep it kind of to themselves about what some of that aspirations are. No, I think people who can actually be open about that, give other people somebody to be more excited to follow. I would say with that, confidence is something for me that, comes to mind. And look, I don't think, there's anything wrong at times with the fake it till you make it. There's maybe another way to look at that today is, this is something, and I'll jump over to somebody else who has some executive presence too, with, Beyonce, if you will. And the way that Beyonce could command a room or a stage. And this goes with a lot of artists. But what Beyonce's mentioned before, gosh, I'm going to go blank on the name right now. She has her other stage personality.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, 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 yeah.
I'm going
I
blank on it
forget what
now.
it is.
Yeah, but Kobe too. Kobe, speaking, of your background there.
Black Mamba.
Yeah. So I think sometimes these individuals don't have this natural, uncanny ability to be confident, but they channel somebody who will. Sasha
Sasha
Fierce.
Fierce.
Yeah, I
Sasha
just gave
Fierce.
it me too. Sasha Fierce is Beyonce. So, like, this personality that you could channel in those moments, because maybe the confidence wasn't there, but you know that Sasha Fierce or Black Mamba, are going to be able to have these things, and to be able to channel that. So I think it's really important for people to remember, because even those who you look at who are like, yeah, but they're pros at this. No, they channeled, this other personality when they wanted to show up in that sort of way. And I have no doubt that, I mean, you and I both like Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins talks about it backstage before he comes out. He's got a little trampoline he jumps on because he's getting his energy level there. And there's different ways that people can channel, this energy so that when they go out on stage. And I think that's one thing everybody you just mentioned has in common for the most part. When they come out on that stage, they're there. And that's why they command that. They've got this energy, and this personality that you're drawn to, but they're doing things often backstage to prepare themselves for that.
Well, I was gonna say not everybody can be on a big stage, uh, but your office, your conference room is your stage, or your Zoom or Google Meets. That's your stage, and that's where you got to learn how to command and tell, and show confidence and tell the right stories and communicate what your mission and vision is. That's your stage. You got to master that.
So I think, another thing I would say that is really important when it comes to executive presence, and important in general, I think for anybody who's looking for a career advancement or, advancement in anything that they do, is emotional intelligence. And this is boiled down. There's different components of it, but the ability, both the self-awareness to understand so that you can see how you are, coming across, but also relationship management is a key component of that. And I think that's another thing that, individuals with executive presence really have. I remember when we had worked with, an individual, and they would enter, a room with meeting with other executives. This one individual had this way of entering the room different from everybody else. And when they came in that room, they came in, they actually paused right when they entered the door. They looked around for a minute, took it in, which gave them just this presence, that because nobody else was doing the same sort of thing. They'd smile at different people and connect with you. Usually it was the few that were looking up at them, but for that moment, you're like, it made you feel like, oh yeah, hey buddy, you felt this connection to them. And then they would come and sit down, and it was just this way that they owned that room. And this person wasn't the loudest person in the room, but when this person spoke up, you listened.
Yeah, I actually say that usually the loudest person in the room hurts themselves when it comes to executive presence, because it just doesn't doesn't portray you in the right way. Everybody starts thinking that you're the loudmouth that's not allowing others to speak, and that could definitely hurt you, and do the opposite.
I think you're right. And then there was this other, like stat around nonverbal communication that I had here that I think speaks to this, which is there's research by Albert Merhebian suggests that around 55% of communications impact comes from nonverbal cues such as body language, facial expressions, and tone in the voice, while only 7% is attributed to the actual words spoken. So I think a lot of this here is, yeah, there's so much that is said without anybody saying anything, but it's how they're engaged. If you are just talking about a meeting, the person in there who's on their phone, who's on their laptop, that doesn't convey executive presence. In fact, when I had seen people do that, even if they were a high level, they get away with it because they have authority, but it doesn't necessarily mean or have them come across as the one owning the room. And that's why I could be in rooms and you could see these other individuals that actually own the room a lot more than those other individuals who just kind of feel like they showed up and they're sitting over in the corner, even though they theoretically are the ones who are at a higher level position. So the title doesn't necessarily correlate with the executive presence.
I want to play a little devil's advocate and ask a question. So most of us and listeners, and both you and I, didn't actually interact with Steve Jobs personally. I actually walked by him once on the Apple campus in Cupertino. He just walked by me. I walked by him. But
Did you fall in gasp and you know
no, but
love you, Steve Jobs?
I did feel like the spirit enter my body. And
Yeah.
um, but there were some stories out that, people that worked closely with him or reported to him, reported that maybe he was a little mean, that fired people on the spot. Um, what would you say about those stories? And how does that connect to or not connect to this topic of Steve Jobs having really good executive presence?
I think it's kind of like when I was mentioning even Elon earlier. I think Elon's known for some of those stories too. People are like, yeah, they make them sleep in the rooms and stay out overnight, or the way he cuts people is ruthless. I think that you can be somebody who's very uh I'm trying to think about what they I don't want to say cutthroat because I do feel like cutthroat was a little bit too far, but I think some of these individuals who have these really clear visions and missions, well, in order to achieve those and get there, they have to make decisions sometimes fast. Sometimes those decisions are right, sometimes those decisions are wrong. But no matter what you do, you are always going to rub somebody the wrong way. And while I haven't been in any of those experiences to say exactly, what I can say is that even you and I, in the roles and the positions we've had in our careers, we may have had loads of people um, who respected us, and I'd say fans, but they're probably like, whoa, 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 we weren't fans. But there were people who looked up to us in these different ways, came to us for advice. But there were also some other people who were on the other side, whatever they wanted to whisper behind the scenes. I remember somebody saying to me, I still don't know why this is bad, but it sticks in my head. Somebody gave me the feedback that, hey, yeah, heads up. I was talking to some of those individuals over at lunch, and Joe Schmo will just say, and Joe Schmo said that the only reason you actually get promoted is because you get things done. And I'm like, is that bad? But the point is, this is how some people will look at it. And I could read into it and I could be like, well, are they saying that I have no other skills other than getting things done? Whatever the heck that means, because you need a lot of skills to get it done. But I think that ultimately you are going to offend some people. I mean, heck, you got Kobe jersey behind you there. And even though nobody would disagree that Kobe was a great player, you still have haters. So I think they're going to exist no matter what. And I think though that it will be hard to have executive presence and that success if you weren't delivering a level of results. And I think that's sometimes the difference is I think you have some people who they may have showed up to a degree with executive presence, but if they weren't able to follow suit in the way that they treated humans and on a clear vision, then I actually think it falls apart.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, hopefully it wasn't a trick question because I, what I want to say to that is people like Steve Jobs, like Elon Musk, good leaders, they just have very high standards and they don't put up with bullshit. And I think that's what is probably the root of it is they know what needs to be accomplished. They have high standards. And if you're just not meeting that standard, it's like, well, get out of the way because you're just baggage at this point. Um, and I admire that. and good leaders. Actually, I don't look at it negatively. I don't know what others think, but I don't look at it negatively at all.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and I think, the 2 don't always have to come together either. You can have somebody with executive presence. I'm not saying they have low standards, but I also think that they may not come, their goal may not be to put somebody on Mars or something else that they're or save mankind, depending on how you wanna, look at it. But, I mean, I think there is always that risk though. The more somebody becomes a public persona, that they're also going to find more things flung, their way. Oprah's in the news recently because of what she said, meaning to be helpful with the fires in Maui, but she did say, "Hey, stay back." Like it was meant to be. Let's kind of show some respect and not overcrowd. But then in the end, now people are like, That's how we make our money. What are you doing?" And you have to reverse. And it's like that wasn't the intentions, but people could spin them out of control, and I think that happens a lot, especially when you're even more charismatic, because you'll find yourself in the news and stories being written more about you. I think if we talk about presidents, there's certain presidents who definitely had stronger executive presence than others, and I think that helped them. But of course, then on the flip side, they always had people who took the story a completely other direction.
Yeah, interesting you bring up presidents, because in the business world we say executive presence, but in politics we say this person looks presidential. Uh, Which is almost the same thing. They're almost the same thing, and they both tie back to their ability to communicate, tell stories, and rally a large group of people around the common cause. So whether you're presidential or executive presence, I think it's the same thing, and people are identifying a similar pattern, but they're just calling it a different thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's pretty interesting. Uh, so I want to wrap up, I think, with a couple of items on here, if it's okay. Unless there's anything you didn't feel we.
No, I think that's it. I think what I want to ask you is, well, what if somebody was to focus on two things to improve their executive presence and be like Steve Jobs or a Obama. I'm just going to name some good presidents. Not that they were good, but presidents that had really good presence. Because Obama was such a good speaker, so was JFK. What would you say? What are the two or three things?
I'm gonna cheat here because look, like if we think about some of the things that we did just say, and while I think that there are some of these things that you can focus on, each one of them is loaded. So I could easily say communication and I could say emotional intelligence, but it's like you need some of each to do the other. And communications in its own right could then cover so many different things. Like when we talk about somebody's voice and how they talk, or, heck, eye contact, body language, your movement, all of this is communication. So I feel like I'm cheating by saying that. So instead, I'm going to actually recommend that people focus on looking to individuals that they feel have a strong executive presence. And this doesn't have to be a public persona. I mean, sometimes that's helpful, and because you could watch videos and footage on how they do it. There's lots of stuff out there on Steve Jobs, Sheryl Sandberg. You could look at stuff on, Beyonce for that matter. You threw Jay-Z out there. It's like they're out there. But I think somebody should look at somebody in the public eye, and they should look at somebody in their own company that they would like to look to. And I think model them, because I don't think it's one thing. It's like playing golf, which I'm not very good at. I'm really good at finding the ball. So, um, ultimately in golf, you can't just tell somebody, "Hey, only focus on this." I mean, maybe somebody would, but being somebody who learned a lot of the wrong things, each one of them matter and they build up. So I think somebody needs to look at it. And then I think they look at it step by step. How does that person enter the room? How is that person presenting? Then talk to the person. How are they preparing for those presentations? You'll find out behind the scenes, just like we had with somebody we respected at Disney, that they came across as amazing, but they put in so much time to come across as amazing. So I think really looking to somebody that you can model and then pick apart each thing. What's their posture like? How do they dress? What is their grooming like? And obviously, grooming could fit differently depending on the individual. It may not matter completely, but their physical shape sometimes matters too. People may not want to hear that, but at the same time, it depends. On when you are at the gym, the person who enters the gym, that's where it's going to matter a lot more. When somebody comes into a room and they're wearing this really nice business suit, then that's gonna, also be something that stands out, male or female. If it fits them well and they look good, going to be like, dang, like they can control the room a bit more with those steps. So I think it's modeling for the different pieces. I don't think it's just a single one that I would easily be able to say. It's a single person I would say try to find.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. Um, to add to it, definitely looking and dressing the part just gives you a leg up. So if you got that, yeah, it makes it easier. If you're going to model somebody within your own company and you actually, that person is accessible to you, reach out to them. See if they want to be a mentor and help you pick up. They might give you the tricks of how do they do it. And that's a really good way, picking up that mentor that you want to model. Wow. That's just like golden right there.
I agree. I want to point out one other thing too that's really important for people to consider because this could look slightly different too for male and female. So if somebody's looking at it and being like, "Hey, I'm looking to," if it's female looking to a male, there may be different signals that a male gets away with that a female doesn't, and to vice versa. So there was actually a research by the Center for Talent Innovation. They showed that executive presence can be perceived differently based on gender. For women, it's a delicate balance between projecting authority while remaining approachable, whereas men may be expected to exhibit more assertiveness. So, like it or not, that is a dynamic that we do have to consider in the workplaces or in life in general, because unfortunately, sometimes if somebody does come off a certain way, and like if a female is being more assertive, then that's where name calling and other things and it coming across as too strong. And then similarly, if a man comes across as a little bit less assertive, then that could be looked at as though he's not possessing that executive presence. So definitely gender dynamics play a role.
Yeah. And then the last layer I want to add is culture, because that same type of assertiveness or authority that somebody in the US might show might be really bad in Japan, as an example, because the Japanese culture is not, being assertive and aggressive is not good at presence in Japan. So you really have to understand your own culture. That's why Michael's advice of picking a public figure and then somebody within your company to emulate, because it will be within your own culture. That is absolutely the best way to go.
Yeah. A couple of resources I think that would be beneficial for people to look at. So one of them is when you mentioned culture there's a book called Culture Map by Aaron Meyer. And this is really fantastic because it looks at that. And in fact, if anybody's ever, like if you're a company across the globe, it's a really valuable exercise to do because you can go through, they have an online assessment and actually see the difference in styles of how people approach. And you might find some of that within countries like the US that are also just different, but it's really interesting to see how people correspond. There's another thing I'd recommend too. Nancy Duarte, she talks about structure of greatest like storytellers and some of the presentations. And she literally has a company where they help people prepare these great presentations. And she breaks down Steve Jobs in one of them, and also Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. And you look at how these leaders prepared, or rather, delivered these presentations, and this way that they painted this picture of this future people get excited for. It also makes it a great resource. And then a third one is that it's at the YouTube channel in general. It's called okay, Charisma. Is it Charisma? Oh man, now I have to look at it. But there's a YouTube channel I'll look up real quick, like here and share. But they have so many great things on charisma, and they break it down and have really good examples of celebrities and stuff like that to be able to see how they command a room, which I also recommend. Is there anything you would add to those?
No, I think that's it. Michael and I actually did take Nancy Duarte's training on presentation. It was amazing. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I learned so much from it. So yeah,
Yeah.
really good.
Charisma on Command was what I was thinking of and couldn't remember the name, so I did just look it up. So that's another really great resource for people to kind of watch and just see how they approach. And I mean, they dig into things. I remember one of them that talked about oh gosh, who's the current actor who's playing Spider-Man?
I
Anyway,
lost track.
they're okay, yeah, but they have one of them where he's basically sitting there. Tom Holland, he's in a on a talk show, and you just see like the way that like he responds and can loosen things up, and you see it with a few different individuals, and this ability to do that, and again, recommand moments in the conversation that otherwise might have went south with the person who wasn't able to sort of have that emotional intelligence, but also be able to um, usually often they leverage humor. And this is another ability that that comes with executive presence. I know some people are like, "Oh great, now I got to be funny." Yeah, watch these videos,
Yeah.
and
You
they're
don't have
really
to be a
great because
comedian. Yeah, yeah.
no.
It's not being a comedian, but when you're telling a story, if there's a little humor in there, definitely helps your case.
And oftentimes it's just your ability to laugh in a situation to remove the tension that might be in the air that then lets everybody else know in the room, oh, everything is okay. So the other thing too is I could link to here is there's a little spreadsheet I'd put together in the past that might help people kind of go through and grade yourself on your executive presence. Happy to be able to share that. And if anybody has any thoughts or feedback and ways to continue to make it a better resource for others, and please let us know.
Yeah, thanks for listening and watching. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and comment. Greatly appreciate it.
I'm gonna go work on my flips because since I ain't making it in my own gymnasium, I'm gonna try to at least show up at one of my kids' events that I got in the future. I'm sure that'll make them
Perfect.
really popular.
Yeah, perfect. This is the way.
This is the way.